Welcome to The Right Atmosphere, podcast for writers, brought to you by Atmosphere Press, the only publisher that puts rewarding and meaningful author experiences above all else. I'm your host, Hala Alawi. On this episode, we'll be talking about how to get started as a ghostwriter with our guest, Alison McBain. Alison's human-created novels are the recipients of over 13 awards, including the Forward Indies. Her work has been nominated for both Best of the Net and the Pushcart Prize, and she was recently shortlisted for the Alpine Fellowship in 2025. When not writing for herself, she's a ghostwriter who has penned over 24 books for clients, as well as an award-winning editor who has worked with both celebrity and New York Times bestselling authors. In 2024, she pursued a project called Author versus AI, where she wrote a book a week using no AI at all. So that totaled 34 books at the end. When not writing, Alison is the associate editor for the magazine Scribes Micro and draws all over the walls of her house with the enthusiastic help of her kids. She lives in Alberta, Canada. Thank you so much for joining me, Alison.
Oh, thanks so much for having me on. It's great to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially, I mean, you're such an acclaimed writer under your own name, but obviously you've also taken on the mantle of ghostwriting, and that's clearly working very well as well. So to me, it seems very thrilling and challenging all at once. But I'd love to hear from you. How did you get started as a ghostwriter?
Well, actually, it came about sort of by accident. It was through my editing work. So I work with a number of clients. And the usual editor-author relationship is, the author sends you the work, you suggest edits, send it back, and you sort of work with them to polish the manuscript until it's ready for submission or publication or whatever the goal is. So I was working with a client who essentially after I sent them the edits, they're like, okay, these are great edits. I love them, but can you do them for me instead of me doing? So I was like, you know what? I've never done it. I've never done, ghostwriting. I've never done that sort of collaboration with an author. I've done other sort of collaborations. And so I gave it a try and it was fun. So I added that to my repertoire of, writing, publishing related work that I do.
Yeah, I mean, that is so interesting to me because admittedly, I know very little about ghostwriting, but it's always in my mind felt like a thing where a celebrity says, "This is what happened in my life, write what you will." But it sounds like it's not always that free form. So, do you always start with a starter manuscript, or do you sometimes start with no writing, or what does that sometimes look like?
Yeah, actually both. So I don't do the kind of nonfiction ghostwriting that most people think of. Like I'm not, interviewing people and telling their life story. Instead, I'm doing fiction, which is a completely different type of ghostwriting. So I work with both authors and publishers. So sometimes, a publisher might come to me and say, okay, our author client is under contract for these 3 books. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, health reasons, something else, they can't finish. So we need these books out under
Oh,
their name. And usually that's written into the author's contract, right? If you can't finish it for whatever reason, we can hire another writer to do it. So that's where I step in sometimes. And so sometimes I'm creating a book from scratch. So they're like, maybe it's in the genre of romance, for example. And they're like, okay, it's a sports romance. We need, these 3 books in sports romance. So then I build the book from scratch, do a chapter by chapter outline, work with the publisher until it's exactly how they want it to be. But sometimes I work with authors and they might come to me with a sort of half finished or semi finished manuscript and they don't know how to expand it anymore, so and it's not long enough to get published. So that's when they ask me, okay, here are the bare bones of a story, can you expand it, can you make it publishable? And so then I'll step in and take a 20,000 word manuscript and make it 65, 70,000 words.
wow. Okay. So, I mean, you mentioned you're working with sometimes with publishers, sometimes with authors. As a freelancer yourself, are these people finding you or how are you finding clients?
Both. Sometimes I'm approached for jobs through word of mouth. Sometimes I also advertise my services on different platforms. So it really depends. And it really depends how much work that I'm able to take on at a time, because I do have my own deadlines and projects to do. So sometimes I can only take on one client at a time, sometimes more.
Gotcha. And when you are looking at a potential project, are you looking for particular things that help you decide whether to take on that project, or do you just take a challenge as it comes?
It depends. If there's something that is like particularly challenging that I haven't done before, a lot of times I am willing to take a stab at it. I always love learning something new about the writing process. But sometimes, it's just like, okay, I'm very comfortable doing this. This is something that I can write quickly, have the project complete by the deadline. So I'll just use it to fill in that gap when I'm freelancing.
Gotcha. And so this is the thing that has always been very it made me very curious about ghostwriting. Do you ever feel that you are like frustrated creatively by the constraints of your clients? And if you do, how do you deal with that?
Um, not so much, because usually
Oh, good.
before I start writing, I know exactly what the parameters are. So I'll know what the characters are. This is something we sort of agree on ahead of time, and where I'm going to go with the story. And often, especially if I'm writing a book from scratch, depending on who I'm working with, I can be given a lot of leeway. So I can have
Mm,
a lot of room to roam free, sort of,
right.
within a particular genre, within particular tropes. So
Mm,
usually I do get a fair amount of freedom. The ones that are more constrained, I would say, is if I'm taking an actual manuscript, a shorter manuscript, and expanding that, because the character is already
right.
established, the setting, what happens in the story. So that's where I have to, toe the line a bit more and make sure that I don't go off on wild flights of fancy.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. It's kind of like, the job of a translator where you almost have more constraints, even though you're starting further than, the start line, because you have this content and you have to expand on it in a way that still makes sense to the original source material. So, are you ever like feeling this push and pull with maintaining your own narrative creativity while also maintaining the voice of another name, or does that not factor too much into it?
Um, well, I do that a lot with my own work. So like for
Mm,
each book, to make sure each book sounds unique, you have to have unique voices for your characters. So you can't have the same voice for every book. So I do that a bit myself. So it's not as hard as you might think to like slip into someone else's voice. And especially if I'm writing in the voice of someone else, like, I'll do my research. I'll read several of their books before I get started, make sure that it's something that I feel comfortable doing. There were a couple projects that I've turned down because I'm like, I don't think I'm the right writer for this. I don't think I will
mm,
give it 100% in the same way
right.
as someone else. So I definitely can pick and choose. And it's important as a ghostwriter to pick and choose and not just take everything thrown at you, because you don't want to have, um, I guess, failures behind you. You want to
Right.
be able to execute as well as if you're writing your own work under your own name.
Yeah, and I imagine, your reputation is also staked on how well you could actually perform, quality over quantity in that way.
Mhm. Well, it's a
So
bit of
you
both,
touched
actually.
yeah, gotcha, yeah. Staying prolific to some degree as well, it sounds like. So you touched on this a bit earlier when you were talking about how you get started, but for someone who's looking to get into ghostwriting, is there one piece of advice you would give them to start themselves off?
Well, part of the way that I built my ghostwriting was because I had the experience beforehand. So I had books published under my own name, short stories. I worked as an editor. So part of that could be building up, those skills ahead of time. But if you know you're a fast writer and it's something that you want to do, I'd say get started. Work on some smaller projects, maybe. There are people who do look for short story ghostwriters, for example. It sounds very weird, and it's a very small small job market, but maybe get started with something small. There are a number of websites where you can advertise your services, say what you've done in the past, such as Readsy, Upwork, Fiverr, and just get started, like, and people aren't expecting, top tier, ghostwriter who, is writing for the stars kind of thing. So yeah, just give it a try and see what happens.
Before we say goodbye to our guest, I'm happy to say that this episode is brought to you by Atmosphere Press, the only publisher that puts rewarding and meaningful author experiences above all else. Founded in 2015 by an author and PhD in literature and devoted to serving authors through editorial, design, publication, and promotion, Atmosphere has sold tens of thousands of copies of their authors' books across 6 continents. Visit atmospherepress.com to sign up for Atmosphere's newsletter, The Launchpad, and to learn about submission opportunities, event news, and free book, publicity, and writing residency giveaways. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for these insights, Alison. I also want to check in for all of our listeners, for anyone wanting to learn more about you and what it is you do, where should they go?
Well, I'm on all the socials, but they're all listed on my website, which is AlisonMcBain.com. That's Alison with 1 L. I always have to specify that.
Yeah, I can imagine. I'm sure that comes up all the time. Well, thank you again so much. And thanks to all the listeners for tuning in. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of The Right Atmosphere, the Advice for Writers podcast. If you liked what you heard, please leave a review and share this podcast with the writers in your life. And if you're ready to take the next step in your publication journey, visit atmospherepress.com to submit your manuscript for publication consideration or to learn more about writing and what it is that we do. I'm Hala. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you in the next episode.